Good evening, Texas. I always have that question, though. You mightn't like this. I always have that question when I land in Austin am I in Texas? Okay, I've got to get hooked up here. Is Kyle there? Where's my man, Kyle? Okay, I may have to do this myself. I don't see Kyle around. Just talk among yourselves or not, you know. Quick shout out here. How many people here, I don't want to embarrass anyone, how many donors are there to the Gosnell film here right now? Thank you very, very much. We're very much appreciative of you. And I'm going to show an exclusive clip from the film tonight. If anyone's filming anything, you can't film when I show the trailer because all kinds of contractual reasons that I can't do that. Can we see something on the screen there? Can we? Yes? No? Yeah? No? No? That's me. I recognize myself. It's all happening. Some of you might recognize this photograph that I have. I changed the photograph at the front of my presentation tonight, and some of you will recognize it. I'm not going to talk about it right now, but I'll be curious to know if any of you who recognize it. Just as a quick warning, because people often get nervous when I speak, I'm not going to show any photographs. I always think people need to know that in advance, because I think people get scared. And also people get scared about the movie. And I can tell you that the movie is suitable for 12-year-olds, and we were really careful about that, because some of us of my age aren't likely to get pregnant anytime soon. So this film has to be suitable for very young people, and it has the power to change minds and to change hearts, and to change the world, actually. It's really interesting. I met someone earlier at the reception, and they'd never heard of Gosnell. And by the way, I go and speak at pro-life events all over the country, and loads of people in the pro-life movement have never heard of Gosnell. And you can imagine, if people in the pro-life movement haven't heard of Kermit Gosnell, this country has not heard of Kermit Gosnell, but my God, they'll have heard of Kermit Gosnell by the time I'm finished. Some of you actually, I don't know if there's people here from the oil and gas business. I've made documentaries about environmentalists. I've been going after environmentalists for years. We're making films that tell the truth about the oil and gas business, about mining, about resource development. So this story is not in my wheelhouse. And it's incredibly odd how I even came to this story. We had made a film called Frack Nation, available on Netflix. And you can buy a DVD too. I didn't bring any with me tonight, but I did bring the books. And I'm not bringing the books home, so they have to be sold this evening, because I'm going on to Pennsylvania tomorrow. But my husband was in Pennsylvania traveling around with the film Frack Nation and happened to be in Philadelphia and heard about a local crime story. And my husband is a journalist in his DNA. Wherever there's a story, no matter where we are in the world, he'll ferret it out. He has a real nose for journalism. And he goes into the courtroom in Philadelphia where Kermit Gosnell is facing multiple charges of homicide for killing babies who were born alive, and then he cut their necks with scissors. And what he found most shocking was that the seats reserved for journalists were empty. And I'm going to give you a quick little tour of the Kermit Gosnell story and ask the question, what has to happen for the media to pay attention? And I think it's really interesting and kind of bizarre, and maybe God acting in a very, very bizarre way. But I think this story about Murphy is quite interesting. Do you know what I'm talking about? Representative Murphy. Because of Representative Murphy's bad behavior, all the major mainstream media had to mention that he was pro-life and that the 20-week pain-capable bill had been passed. And they hadn't mentioned it before that. Some of you have not heard about Representative Murphy, and I'm not planning to tell you the details of that. You can look it up. I think some of you know about it. When Kermit Gosnell was on trial, Jodi Arias was on trial at the same time. Everyone in the United States knows who Jodi Arias is. She's a girl who murdered her boyfriend and had lots of, it had a very colourful relationship, let's put it that way. And people got entertained with her sex life, and the whole country knew who she was. No one's ever heard of Kermit Gosnell. We went on the street and showed people photographs of Jodi Arias and put people photographs of Kermit Gosnell. Everyone recognized her, they named her, they knew what had happened. I mean, obviously it's very sad, her boyfriend, he was murdered. She murdered her boyfriend. But Kermit Gosnell, America's most prolific serial killer, according to ABC News, and crickets. This photograph was taken by J.D. Mullane, a journalist in Philadelphia. He risked going to prison for taking this photograph to show and to shame the journalists that never turned up. And here's the story. Here's the people. So when the jury were in the trial of Kermit Gosnell, these photographs were put up opposite the jury so that they could remember the faces of the people who were giving evidence. These are the people who worked for Kermit Gosnell. And all of these people have about a 7th grade education. And they worked as anaesthetists. And they drugged women. And most of them had a combination of drug addiction, they were alcoholics, they had been abused as children. They were a complete mess. As the cop said, the famous cop who put this guy eventually in prison, as he said, you wouldn't trust them to mow your lawn. And these are the people who ran that clinic. And there was this guy, Steve Massoff. Steve Massoff is responsible for getting me back to prayer. Kermit Gosnell never, ever took the stand at this trial, but Steve Massoff did. Steve Massoff is from a nice family. He studied medicine in the West Indies, came back to the States and couldn't get a residency and was working in a pub. And Satan is active. And he managed to meet a guy who introduced him to Kermit Gosnell, and Steve Massoff ended up working in the clinic. And his testimony is the worst thing I've ever read. So I'm writing this book, and I'm reading through his testimony, and I got so frightened in the beautiful sunshine in California that I knelt down beside the computer and I prayed. And I hadn't prayed for a really long time. Because here's what he said. He said, I was a fireman in hell. He said, the blood ran down the walls. He said, there were so many of them. There were so many of them. I ran with scissors. Because Gosnell had taught them all. He taught all the staff how to kill the babies when he wasn't there. And there were so many of them that this guy said, I ran with scissors. There's this woman, Adrian Morton, who's had a really horrible background, terrible things happened to her. She also killed babies, and she went to prison. I interviewed her, and it's really interesting, because I said to her, it must be terrible to go to prison. And she said, nah. Meant nothing to her. And she even described to me that when obviously the women went to the women's prison, that whole thing of honor among thieves, all the other women shouted, you can imagine, baby killers with all the nice expletives to go with that. And I said, was that not very scary? And she said, no, that didn't scare me. So the interesting thing about Adrian Morton is Adrian Morton took a photograph that became very significant in the trial. She took a photograph of baby boy A. Baby boy A was born on the 12th of July 2008, and he died on the same day. But he lived long enough to have an extraordinary impact on the workers at 3801 Lancaster. 3 of them took photographs of them, including Adrian Morton. And I said to Adrian, did anything about the prison bother you? And she said, the dark. I never wanted them to turn the light out because then I could see him. And I said, who did you see? And she said, I saw baby boy A. And all I could do was I could say to him, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And these 2 women, called the Delaware Girls, Sherry West and Linda Williams, who both were working in the clinic the day that Karnamaya Mongar died. Karnamaya Mongar was a Bhutanese refugee who spent 20 years in Nepal in a refugee camp with a tin roof. She came to the United States and lived for 4 months before she ended up dead in Kermit Gosnell's clinic. And these are the 2 women that drugged her to death. And I've been working on this story for a really long time, and it's really funny how a detail suddenly strikes you that you hadn't noticed before. She didn't speak English. She had very, very little English. She brought her daughter with her, who was a grown-up daughter, to try and speak to people. But then she was alone during the day. And at one point, and they drugged her all day, as many of you know in these late-term abortions, it's a 3-day process. So she had come 2 days in a row, and the second day she's there. And she started to put up a fuss. And it struck me afterwards that here's a woman who didn't speak English, who had lived in the most appalling conditions in a hut in Nepal, in a refugee camp for 20 years, but suddenly it struck her. These two women were constantly giving her drugs, and she thought, oh my God, I'm going to die here. And she started to put up a fuss to try and escape. And Sherry West phoned Kermit Gosnell, who was at home listening to music, and he just said famously, "Med her up." And they knew what that meant, was to fill her up with Demerol, and she died. And she died in the sanctuary city of Philadelphia. Don't even get me started about the sanctuary city of Philadelphia, who couldn't give a toss that this genuine refugee was dead and buried. And guess what the Department of Health did? They didn't even inspect the clinic. There wasn't even a police report until one police officer became concerned. And Elizabeth Hampton, I've met Elizabeth Hampton, she's an alcoholic. She worked at the clinic. You can just imagine, this is a person who was giving medication to people. And Tina Baldwin brought her own daughter, who was 15, to work at the clinic. Her daughter, Ashley Baldwin, was the chief anaesthetist. And actually, it's really interesting. The assistant district attorney, Christine Wexler, said it was lucky that Ashley Baldwin was the chief anaesthetist, because a lot less people died, because she took it really, really seriously. And she took it more seriously than the others who were giving the drugs. And no one died on Ashley Baldwin's watch. Can you believe that? And she made a cheat sheet of the drugs that she was giving people. I have a friend who's an anesthesiologist who has just retired and was, spent every day of his life thanking God he hadn't killed anyone. I mean, anesthesia is so precise until you get to 3801 Lancaster. And then there's Gosnell's own wife, Pearl Gosnell. She worked on her own with him on Sundays, what they called the Sunday babies, the more difficult cases. And the grand jury very, very, very tragically described in their report, we will never know who those children were, because the reports and their records were all burned, and the children's remains were never found. However, we do know that Gosnell took remains of babies from that clinic and was seen on one occasion bringing them to his shore house, where he put them into crab pots. No remains were ever found, but nobody, any doctor I've spoken to, said that would seem to be right, that everything would have been consumed. This is an extraordinary story. There is a gift in this story, which is unbelievable to say that, but the gift of this story, and the reason why I've spent these many years on this story, is that this story is the story that will get the truth about abortion out to the public in a way that's never happened before. Because no one can say it's an activist thing. This was a court case. This was people speaking under pain of perjury. And here's what they said, and this didn't make the newspapers. McMahon, who was defending Gosnell, from what I've seen, and you can correct me, and this is him talking to the abortion, they brought the good abortion doctor in, because they needed the jury to distinguish between a good abortion and murder. So, from what I've seen, and you can correct me, you obviously know more about this than I do, the evacuation process can be one where tools are used, and the pieces are pulled out, right? Dr. Fusling, yeah, right. McMahon, and you might pull out an arm or a leg or some portion of that. Right. For larger babies. Well, the suction catheter is inserted at the base of the skull to remove the contents of the head, because the head is the largest part of the body that sometimes gets stuck and the brain is suctioned out, grey matter is suctioned out, and the skull collapses and it comes out easily. That was in a court of law in the United States. And you know what was really interesting? And I've interviewed the jury. The members of the jury were more shocked by what a good abortion was than almost by the murders of Kermit Gosnell, because from their point of view, and they were novices, as I was to this subject, they were going, what's the difference? It's just geography. This is the actual cheat sheet that Ashley Baldwin created to try to remind herself of what to give these patients. And she'd say, I'll give a little bit of yellow and a little bit of green. So we've made this movie, and I'm going to show the trailer now. Please God, everyone say a prayer that it'll work. We have the technology. And I'll tell you a bit more about how the film's, how the distribution of the film. The film was made. It's brilliant. It's great. We showed it to an agent in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, a great guy. He said, "This is a great film. We're going to have no problem getting distribution." He went to every distribution company in Hollywood, every last one, name any of them, and they all rejected us. Not one of them said it was because the film was bad. In fact, and I have some of the emails, they said the film was great. Oh my God, this really happened? This is incredible. Yes, not for us. Not for us. And when you look at the kind of people who are running those distribution companies, I think you understand why. Okay, here we go. Let's hope that this works.
What do the feds say?
They're saying it's a drug case.
It is a drug case.
Oh, there's something bad going on there.
Lights down.
I know it.
You got your warrant. You go in with the FBI, stay out of their way.
Move to the clinic fast. Get everyone in separate rooms so they can't compare notes. We are looking for scripts, pills. Don't touch anything else.
Man, you gotta see this.
Look, that cabinet right there. It's full of little baby feet in jars. Look, that's not what we're here for.
And all these bags everywhere. There were little bodies inside.
The Demerol and the cytotec makes them precipitate.
Precipitate?
That's Doc's word for it when the babies come out.
What would happen after the babies came out?
He would take scissors and cut the back of their necks, even the ones that wasn't moving.
Some of the babies were moving?
You have to understand completely what it is you're doing here. You are prosecuting an abortion doctor for murder.
This is not a case about abortion. This is a case about murder. The murder of Karnamaya Mongar and the murder of 7 infants born alive and then killed.
This man's clinic has been in operation for years. Year after year after year of this man successfully treating his patients and giving them the services they requested. Some of them even coming back for a 3rd or 4th procedure. Why would they come back if this man was such a monster?
Well, this baby is big enough to walk me to the bus stop.
If you try this case and lose, you'll be the prosecutor who went after reproductive rights, an activist ADA, and you'll be a racist to boot.
He's been delivering babies alive and then snipping their necks with scissors. Hundreds of them, thousands maybe, for 30 years because nobody wanted to say anything.
We had instructions directly from Governor Ridge's office not to inspect abortion clinics.
Why?
It would hamper women from exercising their reproductive rights.
When you get to the courthouse, you are going to be swarmed by reporters, swamped by them. The courtroom is going to be packed to overflowing.
Where's everybody?
I looked at all the women I treated as if they were my own daughter.
lot of the employees at that clinic have been arrested on drug trafficking charges. Why haven't you?
Objection.
Isn't it true that you made a deal with the DA to avoid prosecution?
Objection.
This case is about that baby and countless other babies that Dr. Gosnell murdered after they were born.
This is the baby I saw moving.
Betty took that picture inside the clinic. That baby was alive.
I have no respect for these laws whatsoever. These poor women who need me have nowhere else to go.
Thank you. It's one of the things that I found most difficult about this story was not so much Gosnell, and I've met Gosnell, I've been in the prison, and he's every kind of creep. He's exactly he's exactly the psychopath you can imagine that he is. He sang to me twice. He kept touching my leg. My husband was there, ended up being really disgusting. After about 2 hours of the interview, started to say sort of really disgusting things to try and embarrass my husband. And I just thought, you know what, we're out of here. But he's a very highly manipulative, he's a liar. But I think what's more disturbing than the existence of somebody like Kermit Gosnell is all the people who enabled him. And it's a real shame that at the top of that list is a Republican, Governor Tom Ridge. Governor Tom Ridge was elected, and I have to say the word moderate always drives me nuts. From once I converted and became a conservative, no one's conservative enough for me. I'm always intolerant of these moderates, And any time, I just don't want anything to do with them. I have no interest in moderates, it's like, just get out. Away with you, So Tom Ridge was elected and became governor of Pennsylvania, running on being a moderate and being a pro-choice candidate, which, by the way, to me seems bizarre for a Catholic. But this quote, which, by the way, is apparently wrongly ascribed to Dietrich Bonhoeffer, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." What's much worse than Gosnell is all these people who enabled him. People knew. Women were arriving in the hospitals in Philadelphia in all kinds of states. Lots of people knew, and no one did anything. Governor Tom Ridge became the governor of Pennsylvania, and the first thing he did was to say to the Department of Health, stop inspecting the clinics. No one inspected Gosnell's clinic in 17 years. During those 17 years, Carnamaya Monger died, and Samika Shaw died, a young African-American mother of 3. And still, no one inspected the clinic. You have to ask yourself, what would have had to happen for them to get off their backsides in Harrisburg and go and check out what was going on there? These are the same people, by the way, who closed down nail salons because they found particulate matter. These are the same people, by the way, it's funny because when you think about it, I did this fracking film. These are the same idiots, by the way, who go to a frack site and find a little bit of water on the ground in a puddle and close everything down because the place is polluted. These people care nothing about health. They care nothing about health. And by the way, anyone who says it's for the children, run for your life. They're the worst. The Department of Health in Pennsylvania, I've always said they should empty the building in Harrisburg and they should burn it to the ground. Then they should go to a bus stop, pick up 2 or 3 random people and put them in charge of the Department of Health in Pennsylvania. They'd have a better chance. The people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would have a better chance of some kind of standard of care. Because it's very interesting, and one of the reasons we wrote this book, which you're buying afterwards, was because there were so many stories we found out that won't be in the movie and can never be in the movie. The night that they eventually raided the clinic, Gosnell's clinic, They didn't raid it because he was murdering babies. They raided it because he was operating a pill mill. And one detective, Detective Jim Wood, who is a real Catholic, a real proper Catholic, and a rock star, he goes in there with Jason Huff from the FBI, young guy, and 2 nurses from the Department of Health. And wait till you hear this. They walk in there, and there are cats walking around. There are dead bodies piled up in the basement. There's shelves filled with babies' feet that have been cut off and kept in jars because they kept trophies. And guess what happens? There are patients there who want their abortions. And guess what the nurses from Harrisburg decided? And by the way, they phoned their superiors. They phoned their superiors and were told to let Gosnell keep working. The only people who objected was Jim Wood and Jason Huff, 2 young men who knew nothing about anything except for lots about decency and common sense. But the people implicated in this story, I wrote them. The Department of Health, the Department of State, the Health Department, the Department of Sanitation, Philadelphia Hospitals, Doctors, School of Nursing, National Abortion Federation. It goes on and on and on. And by the way, I love to make this point. I'm a conservative. I think there might be some conservatives in this room. I'm just going to throw that out there. I'm just going to suggest that. At the very heart of being a conservative is an aversion, a dislike, a disdain, a disgust for big government. If ever anyone ever needed convincing of what's wrong with big government, you got it here. This is the Gosnell case. There's no shortage of government in Pennsylvania. It's Pennsylvania, for God's sake. And Philadelphia, it doesn't get more progressive. And this happened there during their watch. And the dead, 90% of them are black. Black lives do actually matter, I think. But not, except for black lives don't matter to the Black Lives Matters movement, who haven't had a dicky bird to say about these dead children, who have been extremely quiet about these children who have died, and who are, get your head around that. And the victims, Samika Shaw, by the way, where was Black Lives Matter for her? Where's the outcry for her? They're going to put a monument up in Ferguson, Missouri to Michael Brown. Did you know that? He was a thug who tried to beat a police officer to death and ended up dying for his trouble. After he had assaulted an immigrant in a corner shop. My God, there's your tick your boxes of every progressive lovey, and every one of them get ignored. And they want to put up a statue to Michael Brown, but no one's ever heard of Samika Shaw. No one's ever heard of Carnamaya Monger. God, they'll have heard of them by the time I'm finished. And if the Department of Health in Harrisburg, I hate those people so much. And you know what's really awful about them? Lots of them are nurses. And you know that picture in your head, if you think of the word nurse, at least, I don't know, I have that picture in my head, of somebody just gorgeous, who's devoted their lives to caring for people when they're really vulnerable. That's my picture. And I'll tell you, it's been shattered by this story. Those hateful people stayed in their offices as the bodies piled up, and women died, and they still wouldn't go and inspect the clinic. They're hateful, beyond measure they're hateful. And by the way, the nursing school, get your head around this. This is what I have the problem with. As I said, I do not have a problem with Gosnell. I get it. He's a psychopath. But the nursing school in Philadelphia, who sent in interns, they sent the kids in there, young girls in there, to do training. And Christine Wexler, who is just a rock star, one of the ADAs on this story, she said she wanted to hit them when she meant them. God, I'd have lined up. It'd be like that scene out of the Airplane movie where people line up and go. Who reared these people? Who reared those girls? Who reared those people? That they walked into that clinic and saw that stuff and didn't think it was worth reporting. And by the way, and you love this for a kicker, by the way, and this is where taxpayer money goes, into that horrible Jefferson School of Nursing. They wouldn't answer my questions when I wrote to them. Every department of government in Pennsylvania, every one refused to answer my questions. And actually, about 3 of them wrote back and said, you can try and take this further. You can try and do a FOIA. But guess what? No one's ever succeeded. And they wrote that like they were really proud of themselves. God, I hate those people. No wonder we're conservatives. And by the way, I just heard tonight, I didn't know that your state government meet once every 2 years? Rock stars. I love them. And if the horrible people at the Department of Health in Harrisburg had decided to come to this place, this is what they would have found. That's a fridge in the room where people ate their lunch, and that's where the bodies were. That's Kermit Gosnell's office. Have you ever seen a medical doctor's office that looks like that? That's the suction machine. Many of you know what that is. And don't look too long at that. That's some of the feet in the jars, and the names are on with them. And just before it gets too depressing, the great thing about this story is that there are heroes. Jim Wood, rock star, Jason Huff, and Steve Doherty. Just amazing. DEA, FBI, and the Philadelphia police. I mean, just amazing. And by the way, all the people who say awful things about the cops in America, it's certainly not my experience. Jim Wood is an undercover narcotics officer for the DA's office in Philadelphia. It wasn't his thing. He was meant to be just pursuing a drug case. And he found out about the death of Carnamaya Monger, and he became obsessed with her. Wasn't it nice that somebody decided to become obsessed with this dead refugee? Isn't it lovely that somebody cared enough? And he wouldn't let it go, and he pursued it doggedly. And in the first chapter of the book, is about Jim Wood, who has suffered in his life enormously, has had awful things happen to him, but is just such a rock star. The ADA, Christine Wexler, said, "This case would not exist without Jim Wood. He was Carnamaya Monger's champion. He was the only one." It's just great. And they became the three amigos. An interesting thing I think I want to say about, because of this pro-life group here, is the thing that's going to kill us all is what we don't know. And I think it's really interesting how much this story, people have tried to suppress this Gosnell story. Because once people hear it, they get to learn about abortion. They get an education they didn't ask for, and they're not the same afterwards. No one is the same after this story. These two women were the two ADAs on the case. On the right is Christine Wexler, and then the other one is Joanne Pescatore. These girls are two mothers. They're two very smart girls. You can imagine, these are two assistant district attorneys. They didn't know the law in Pennsylvania about abortion, the abortion limit. And when they asked, they were told 24 weeks, which is the law in Pennsylvania. And they didn't know that. And here's my point. I think the pro-life movement make a mistake by not putting up massive billboards telling people in every state of this country what the law is. And people, when they find out what the law is, they don't like it. The jury who sat in this case, who were not pro-lifers, they didn't like it. They all thought that it should be rolled back. All of them thought that. We came across, this is us, this is the team that put this film together, and Phelim, and that's my husband. Be still, my beating heart. As I said, this was bizarre for us to have decided to do this. Phelim sat in the court for about 3 or 4 days and was completely shocked by what he heard. He came back to Los Angeles and said, "This is what we're doing now." And Magda and myself, the two girls, the two other people in the company said, "Nothing. No. We're having nothing to do with abortion. I want nothing to do with abortion." And the position you could say, my position would be that I would be described as, I would have called myself neutral on abortion. Just so you know, that's bullshit. There is no such thing as neutral on abortion. It's not possible. It's not possible. Neutral on abortion means that you are pro-abortion. There is no neutrality in this issue. So Phelim said, and so we're like, we don't want to do anything, we don't want to, it's too controversial, we don't want to, and so Phelim said, "Look, let me buy the court transcripts for the days I was in the court and just read them." And by the way, here's a kicker. Do you know who you have to give the money to when you buy court transcripts? Some of you guys probably know this. The stenographer. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of crazy. But anyway, I'm just going to throw that in there. So we read those 3 or 4 days of the trial, and Magda and I it was like, yeah. And we actually had money to make a different movie. Getting money for a movie is really difficult. We sent the money back. That's how strongly we felt about this. And the film is done. And some of you, thank you very, very much, helped with the crowdfunding we did. We raised over $2.2 million from 29,000 people. Yeah. One of the biggest crowdfunding campaigns ever. And by the way, you can still give at gosnellmovie.com. Because by the way, it shouldn't be 29,000 people. It should be 500,000 people. So give $1. Just give $1, but people, and if you've got 7 children, get all of them to give $1. Because there should be 500,000 people there, not 29,000 people there. And I was going to say, yeah, that's my email address. This is a photograph that I showed at the beginning. Does anyone recognize it? I think somebody's saying it. This is from Schindler's List. And if any of you remember, the whole of Schindler's List is in black and white, except for this child that you see, who you never hear speak or anything, but you see this child and she's wearing a red coat. And you notice her, of course, because it's the only color. And then at the very end of the movie, you see the red coat in a big pile of dead bodies. And I think this is the thing about the story of abortion, is that it's all about the particulars. It's all about the one case. It's all about the details. It's the details that kill people. Baby boy A his birthday is the same birthday as my own father, July the 12th. So, I think there's lots of those kind of coincidences. We wrote the book, and it went into the true crime section in bookstores, which I thought was kind of great because people read a lot of true crime, and this is a true crime story. Then we got we did a big tour. Mark Stein, still my beating heart. Eric Metaxas, The Thinking Woman's Piece of Crumpet. And then I got on Bill O'Reilly. And by the way, what a gentleman he was. And then, you know that thing, like all good immigrants, you know that thing that they say about America, only in America? So the book came out, and 3 days after the book came out, 2 days after the book came out, it sold out everywhere, on Amazon, Books A Million, and Barnes & Noble. And then we got an invitation to the White House. And we got to meet Mike Pence and Kellyanne Conway. Oh, yes. And when the book had sold out everywhere and went to number 3 in all the books being sold by Amazon all over the United States, we thought, oh, we're going to be in the New York Times bestseller list now. And we weren't. And then people put up such a stink that we ended up on the New York Times bestseller list. But it's a very interesting thing about the New York Times bestseller list. Here's the easy way to remember it. The New York Times bestseller list is a fake list in a fake newspaper with fake journalists, where they can't even be honest enough to have a bestseller list. You know how to do a bestseller list? Do you know how to create that? You just download it from the internet, right? It's all there on the internet. It's all collected. It's all data collected. No, they have a committee meeting. They meet and discuss and decide what will go on. And the only reason we got on the list was because they were embarrassed by the number of people writing and saying, how is this even possible? We hate those people. I want to tell you one story. I'm kind of looking, I'm not sure where my time is, and I'm kind of nervous about that, but I think it's important to tell good stories in this awful story, and I want to tell one, and no matter what, I'm going to stay here and tell this, even if you try and drag me off the stage. So the grand jury, you know the way the grand jury system works in this country? So obviously when the case is very complicated, you have to try and work out, well, what kind of crime occurred here? And in this case, it was very complicated. So the grand jury met for almost a year and a half. And you can imagine, and people know, grand juries are made up of regular people with their shopping, women are in their knitting, it's like regular folk. So this crowd were in there, and they heard like the worst stories ever. Like, there are terrible stories, I'll be honest with you, in the book, because that's what we did with the book. Everything's in the book. Like everything's in the book, and it's not an easy read, but I think everyone has to know the details. And I have 100 copies, that's all, and they're going to go tonight. So this one witness came into the grand jury, and they said, well, what happened to you? Like, what's your story? And she said, oh, well, you know, I went to Gosnell for an abortion, and it was one of the 3-day procedures. So you go the first day, and you get the seaweed or whatever, and then the second day, whatever. So she goes in the first day, and Gosnell's there, and she says to him, what happens to the babies afterwards? And he said, oh, we burn them. So she went home that night. She had done the first part of the procedure, and she got upset. Suddenly she kind of, I don't know, felt like she knew that she was pregnant. I don't know, started to recognize what was going on. And she told her cousin, and her cousin phoned Gosnell, and Gosnell said, you're not getting your money back. And I don't do reversals. And Joanne Pescatore in the grand jury said to her, and then, so what happened? And she said, oh, my baby started kindergarten today. And the grand jury, for the first time in anyone's memory, stood up and applauded. It's great. So when we were writing the script for the film, we were like, that story has to be in there somewhere in the movie, and it is in the movie. And just, you know, wait till you hear this. I'm going to end on this story, but I'm going to show you another piece of film. So you see the girl there. See the girl on the right-hand side? Her name is, well, it doesn't matter anyway, Tracy Watley. But she acts in the film. She plays the role of that girl. And she's just a girl that the director found in an IHOP in Oklahoma City and said, will you be in the movie? You know those kind of things that do actually happen. So the film wasn't shot in sequence, and the last scene of the film is outside the courtroom after the verdict. And she's in that scene. And so she was there, and I was chatting to her as grand. The second time she came was the scene in the grand jury. And so she's there waiting, and she has the script in her hand, and she sees me because I've been chatting to her, and she said, come here. I just read the script. This is my story. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, I was having an abortion in Houston, by the way, in Houston, Texas, she told me. And she was lying on the bed, and there was a nurse there, and the nurse said to her, here, I want you just listen to your baby's heartbeat. I have to go and do some stuff, but I'll be back. And she left her alone, and this girl said, and I just put my clothes on, and I just went out, and my granddaddy was in the car, and we just took off. And I'm sure I've gone over time, but I don't care, because I'm going to stay here. They're going to drag me off. After she told me that, and here's my face. After she told me that, I told my husband, and he said, go back. Ask her, would she talk to you on camera? And so I did. And I want you to hear her tell her story, because it's really amazing. And if this thing starts to act up on me, I'm going to be really upset. Okay, no, say your prayers now. Here we go. No, stop. Tessa. So just don't say yes or no. So don't look at him, look at me.
Okay. My name is Tessa Hartley.
Yeah.
I'm playing Viola Brown in the Gosnell movie.
See, my voice won't be in this, so just don't say yes or no. So you just spoke to me earlier. Why is this role important to you?
I actually symbolize with my character. I also was young and pregnant at once. I went in to actually abort my baby, and the nurse had let me hear my son's heartbeat. That's also something they're not supposed to do. But she let me hear the heartbeat of my baby, told me that was my baby's heartbeat, and said she'd be back to go ahead and do the procedure. So as I laid there for about maybe 4 or 5 minutes, she came in and said she'd be right in, and I laid there and I just started crying and decided it was something I couldn't do. I couldn't kill my baby. So I put my clothes on, I went out to my grandpa, told him I couldn't do it. He said, let's go. And I just feel I very much symbolize with my character in this, and my baby is now 6 years old.
6 years old. Wait. Who are you playing in this story?
Viola Brown.
And what happened to Viola Brown?
She also went through the same thing. She decided not to go through the abortion, and she had her baby, and her baby is 5 years old.
what would you say to girls that are in the same situation as you? What would you say to them?
If you have that opportunity and you decide not to go along with the abortion, don't do it. My son has been so much joy to me, and it's like when I look at him, I just can't believe that I was gonna kill somebody so precious that's a whole generation of me. And I am so thankful to that nurse for giving me the opportunity to change my mind and have my baby, and it's been such a joy. There's days that I just lay in bed and watch him sleep. I'm so happy to have him. So if you have the opportunity, don't kill your baby. Have your baby. It's hard, but have your baby. It'll mean everything to you. Don't kill your baby. Have your baby. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. They are actually going to drag me off the stage. It's really, really nice to be here. I'm going to be here for the evening. I'd love to spend more time to chat to people. I have a really great election story that I can tell over a large pint of beer. So if anyone wants to hear that story, I'm very would like to do that. I will be selling the books outside, and I would like to not leave with any. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Thank you.